Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alberto Vargas. I'm the Associate Director of the Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies Program here at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I give all of you a welcome to our lecture series. Before we start, I just want to mention three events that are happening in this week, and I wanted to make you aware of that, to remind you. This afternoon at 4:30 at the Pyle Center, we're going to have Professor Francisco Segovia from the Colegio de México. He's going to present the Diccionario del Español de México. I hope you can join us. It's going to be in Spanish, but it's a great program. So I encourage you to go to the Pyle Center at 4:30 today. Then on Friday, there is an event also in the Pyle Center from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. There's Making Art in Cuba. There's 4 artists that are going to talk about their art. Going to have a conversation with Rainier Leiva Novo, with Celia Irina Gonzalez, Rafael Villares, and Camila Lobon. This is co-sponsored with the Institute for Research in the Humanities. And I also wanted to invite you to come next Tuesday, where we're going to have a presentation by Professor Paulina Enriquez from the Department of Anthropology here at UW-Madison. And she actually was the one who suggested that we invite the speaker today. And I'm very happy to introduce Professor David Pacifico. He's the director of the Mathis Gallery in the Department of Art in UW-Milwaukee. And he is going to present to us, talk about ritualizing redistribution, late pre-hispanic settlement in the Middle Sechin Valley in Peru. So join me to welcome Professor Pacifico, and I'll get the floor to him. I'm going to share my screen so you can see his slide.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alberto. I want to thank you and the Latin American Caribbean and Iberian Studies Program for this invitation today, as well as my friend and colleague Paulina Enriquez for inviting me as a speaker or suggesting me as a speaker. Thanks to UW-Milwaukee Office of Research and the Office of Undergraduate Research who sponsored the research I'll talk about today. And finally, I need to credit my colleagues Monica Suarez, Morgan Moore, and Carlos Mesa, who facilitated and contributed to the research I'm presenting. So this is actually part of a manuscript that I'm working up right now on an active project. And I expect them to be co-authors as we move this forward in the research, but also publication process. So muchas gracias, colega. So I do want to also emphasize that in addition to being a professor, assistant professor of art history at UW-Milwaukee, I am the director of the Neil H. Mathis Art Gallery and UW Art Collection, and these are free and open to the public. So should you come through Milwaukee, drop us a line. We're open Monday through Thursday, 10 to 4. We're also there outside of those hours, but those are easy walk-in hours. We try to be a yes space. We have 8,000 works of art, artifacts, pieces of visual material culture that are meant to be used to support research, teaching, and learning. And I mention that also because that's not something with our folks associated here on the Zoom. So switched over. So without further ado, I want to present some of the work in progress that we're doing in the Middle Sechin Valley. So in 1532, a platoon of about 20 Spanish soldiers walked into Cajamarca, confronted the Sapa Inca Atahualpa, who was currently engaged in his own contest for the throne, and presented him with a requerimiento. It was basically a boilerplate proclamation that gave the Incas a chance to accept the word of the Holy Bible or be conquered. Famously, Atahualpa held the Bible to his ear, exclaimed he heard no words at all, and tossed it to the ground, which actually had turned into a meme on TikTok and so forth, some 500 or so years later. Outraged, the Spanish overpowered and captured him after a brief battle with his royal guard. So they did this apparently in full view of thousands of residents of Cajamarca, who looked on without taking decisive action. The question is why? Well, most likely Cajamarqueños were less loyal to the Inca and Cusco, than they were to their own local leaders, lineages, and families who've been politically deposed by the Incas within living memory. They were likely accustomed to the vicissitudes of political power as one family faction or another rose to prominence. And additionally, I think the real effective authority lay in traditional Ainu groups, so effectively the Andean version of what we call Caledonian clans. Ayus and their leaders were organized around real and fictive blood ties, and they controlled the distribution of land, labor, and production within their territorial domain. So Atahualpa, we probably see this apply in India, but just like Spanish. But so the capture of Atahualpa, who was not here, but an Inca on the left, was unprecedented in terms of the origin and worldviews of its participants, but its form would probably have been actually pretty intelligible to the Incas. They were conquerors themselves. Their own conquest of the region and the Atahualpa's capture took place only about 50 years earlier. So in about 1475, the Inca Tupac Yupanqui, who we see immortalized in comic book fashion on the left here, marched his own army to Chanchan, capital city of the Chimu Empire on the north coast, which we'll be turning to in a moment, which is actually just downhill from Cajamarca, where Atahualpa was captured. Reportedly, the Chimu Emperor Minchinkama fell to his feet, begging for his life and kingdom. The Inca Yupanqui laughed and told the half-truth. We don't really want to conquer you, we just want to help you be better than you do it, and skim a little bit off the top. So, Minchinkama's begging is also probably apocryphal. He probably knew what the Incas were coming for and how things would play out when they arrived, because, surprise, Minchinkama and his predecessors embarked on their own territorial expansion as a rule. They incorporated foreign lands by force, by diplomacy, and by a good deal of legitimate persuasion. The Chimu were excellent administrators of intensified production, collection, and distribution of staples and of luxury goods, and their arrival in adjacent political territories must have sometimes been a welcome alternative, or at least an accepted alternative, to local administration, at least in pragmatic terms of economic productivity and in a volatile empire. So, successive waves of political and economic expansion across the North Coast. Here we're looking at the North Coast from about Warmay on the bottom right we'll talk about Trujillo a little bit higher, a little bit further north. But this central area right here saw successive waves of political and economic expansion across a landscape of periodic reconfiguration that vacillated between local groups organized around Ainu, like in the Rio-like administration, sort of a local, familial, but extended family sort of based model, and foreign polities expanding across that landscape. And so this is where we crossed paths with the project that I'm currently working on. During their territorial expansion, the Chimu encountered and conquered the Casma State, named for the river valley in which they had their capital city. First, they overran the frontier site of Cerro Sechin, which actually worked at in 2001, directed by Vogel, and they continued marching through what was likely a somewhat discontinuous Casma State territory on their way to the capital city, Purgatorio. We see the monumental district here behind them. They arrived there sometime between 1400 and 1450 in the Common Era, but there's little evidence for violence during the Casma Chimu transition at either Cerro Sechin or El Purgatorio. Instead, joint Casma Chimu ruler Manchan, you see here, El Purgatorio's successor, suggests a strong willingness of some local Casmeños to collaborate with the newly elected administration. Instead of a conquest, we appear to see a shifting of hegemonic forms from a pre-existing pattern of socioeconomic organization, whatever was going on there, to the intensification of production under Chimu, quote-unquote, bureaucratic administration, as discussed by John after his role in the Chimu. So, here we're looking at the Casma Valley, what we're going to focus on. What was that pre-existing socioeconomic organization? And what was the process like as hegemony shifted from local leadership to external bureaucratic oversight that occurred? Well, to determine the answers to these questions, and more generally, to understand the Casma State in greater detail, a better understanding of how the Casma heartland operated is required. And here we see the Casma heartland. The small circle at the bottom is actually El Purgatorio. It's small because it's not the focus of today, but that was the capital city of the Cosmopolity from 700 to about 1400 AD. It saw a massive influx of non-elite population around 1290 and an abandonment by about 1400 when things move over to this other small site, Monchan, which I just mentioned, dual Chimu, which sort of Chimu spread down the coast, Casma rule. And we're going to look at some sites that can give us complementary information about what was going on during the building, apogee, and denouement of the Casma State and Purgatorio and how they may have interfered with the Chimu. So we're going to look at Cerro Sechin, the large circle with a lot of colorful stuff inside it, as well as what we're calling Lago Yete, which is actually a sort of transitional point between the middle and the upper valley. And between Cerro Sechin and Lago Yete, we basically have the middle valley of the Sechin branch of the Casma River. And the fact that we don't see too much in between those two is actually substantiated by the fact that these two areas that I've circled in large yellow circles are where you see the densest and longest occupations of sites in the area. Unsurprisingly, interpreted then as strategic plans and managing the lands. So there's actually a few published results, or relatively few compared to other cultures. Published results from Casma State archaeological sites. Its capital of Purgatorio, a frontier site, Cerro La Cruz, which I also worked at. I actually worked at Purgatorio for many years. A southern frontier site, El Campanario, and its post-apogee site, Monchan, where dual Casma and Chimu rule was centered. Work at Farfan and Puerto Pobre round out publications that Casma identified site, and unpublished research on the VNS2 on the Azúcar, both in the Casma Valley, have also been undertaken with greater and lesser levels. And I just want to point out, so this is about the Casma territory, the stretch of Casma territory from El Campanario and Warme to the Casma Heartland and the Casma Valley, Purgatorio, et cetera, and Cerro Sechin and La Valleta that we'll look at, and Cerro La Cruz in the far north in the Chao Valley, just approaching Trujillo. So Vogel's work at Cerro La Cruz and El Purgatorio present the clearest arguments for interpreting the political organization of the Cosmopolity in its heyday, at least from the perspective of a single site. This is actually the frontier site of Cerro La Cruz, where I did my very first archaeological research under the direction of Vogel. She argues that by any measure, the Cosmopolity was in fact a unified state for at least a portion of the time that its capital, El Purgatorio, was occupied. At that time, the Casma Valley would have served as the heartland of the state, and previous scholars have also raised this possibility. Wilson in 95 and 98, Tom Williams, earlier than that. Others have also posited that the Casma State is a loose confederation of independent sites, and of course, it could be a little bit of both of these things. Vogel's comprehensive work at the edge and the center of the polity territory, and the synthesis of known research, indicates that at least at its apogee, the polity was organized as a centralized state, though during its growth and denouement, intra and inter-valley integration may have lapsed and waned into complicated configurations. So the Casma State was centered at Purgatorio in the Casma Valley and spread out a number of distant valleys. This site, this is the monumental district we see here, large orthogonal adobe structures, a number of compounds that house elite residences, as well as workshops, probably storage areas, production areas, and above all, ritual areas. Up the hill is where it is in like preliminary work here, the non-elite area. It seems that the lower areas were occupied for a longer stretch, and the urban boom, as it were, is in this area that you see to the right and bottom. These two sort of like barrio style or los jóvenes, they almost look like favelas in a way in Brazilian cities. You see a boom in population, 1290 to 1400, which is at the very same time that the Chimu are coming down the coast. So some diagnostic features of Casma State sites are, above all, here we have a plaza platform compound, courtesy of Mesa Vogel and El Purgatorio Archaeological Project, where we have niches, indexical features of prestige like stairways. We have a number of benches and platforms, but above all, we have this platform backed by a niched area that faces a plaza. It also has restricted entries, and some of this is decorated with geometric friezes. There is a certain pragmatism to the material and visual culture. These are not flashy sites. They do not call themselves to, they do not suggest the sort of museum interest that you would see for the Moche or even Chimu, but nevertheless, they have a unified kind of program of visual material culture that suggests a number of other kinds of political and economic congruities across their area. We find these utilitarian wares like everywhere. Students that work on my projects like see these dancing in their dreams and nightmares because there's so many inside circles and dots, and while they're not flashy, they're unmeasurable. They are really diagnostic. I'll point out that we're actually running an ongoing project, so people are looking for opportunities to go to the field and eat delicious food. We choose them experience this ceramic by day and delicious food by night. We don't know about that. So the foundation of Casma State authority is probably twofold. So Vogel and others have proposed that the authority, political authority of El Purgatorio was founded on elite's ability to organize the production, collection, processing, and redistribution of raw and finished materials. But second, and this is sort of my argument today, this political authority was enacted both in the management of natural and finished resources. And here we see there is marine shell all the way up the valley. So people are trucking huge amounts of marine protein all the way through the valley. There is extensive evidence for the production, probably surplus production of maize products. And of course, we have the tools for such surplus production throughout these sites, and that's grinding stone heavily used on the right. But my argument is that the ritualization of their collection and distribution was a key component of Casma State political authority. The proximity of quasi-platform complexes, the multifunctional administrative structures with storage facilities suggests that the collection, processing, and redistribution of goods occurred in close proximity for ritual venues, and thus in association with ritual activities. So given the pattern connection between storage and ritual, I argue that redistribution had to take place in proximity to ritual areas in order for the tensions between the producers and the collectors to be adequately managed. In this light, the collection of goods and enactment of rituals continually reconstitute a kind of social contract that demanded products now from producers and rituals later from collectors. That's to say the administrators, one of the elites. Let's take a look at the evidence we have thus far for this hypothesis as materialized in the present. Let's move on. We're going to focus on Cerro Sechin and to a lesser degree, La Goyete, to visualize how this redistributive economy likely played out in the middle Sechin River Valley, which is a key part of the Casma State interval. And so here I'm going to really get into, that's the sort of premise for this research, exploring what was going on between these sites in the Casma hinterland. And here's the more recent research. I was there in January, we'll be going back in May at these two areas. So the Cerro Sechin archaeological complex is located just 13 kilometers east of the Pacific Ocean. It consists of two small conjoining hills, Cerro Sechin, which is the larger one on the left, and Cerro Laguna. We're going to focus on these two sites right in the middle where you can see a lot of green dots. It's actually one of the shortest points between the front and the back side, and it's also the crux between Cerro Sechin and Cerro Laguna. It's about 2,600 meters long from east to west, 1,300 north to south, and actually only about 500 is the shortest point. The complex consists of at least 7 discrete archaeological sites with orange. However, Cerro Sechin is alternately used to refer to one, the formative period Edificio Principal, or Templo, which is actually been published in the 30s, monumental stone friezes in bas relief, featuring a number of oversized, like larger than life warriors, and many disarticulated bodies that has garnered the most attention. But Cerro Sechin, so that all is often talked about as Cerro Sechin. The hill is also called Cerro Sechin. Both hills together are called Cerro Sechin, and they're actually both ringed with boundary markers labeled Ministerio de Cultura, Cerro Sechin, but actually only the Edificio Principal, the one with the art on it, and a site called Laguna 2, if you see at the far right, have actually been registered with the Ministry of Culture. So the temple has been systematically investigated since the 30s, again in the 80s, and more recently, my own colleagues who work on this project have been doing excavations in the temple itself. There's also been several attempts to document the other sites that I'm talking about here, but none have been submitted until our project and accepted by the Ministry of Culture, much less published. So let's take a look at the other end of the Middle Sechin, La Valleja. So David Wilson actually identified continuous scatters of artifacts and architecture during the 80s and 90s across these sites. But we're going to focus on Calapucho, Tucushuanca, and Hornopampa, which are the three largest and most elaborated sites at this choke point in the valley that also features a very large area for agriculture. The Pazorskis investigated a primitive site in the 2000s and actually suggested we look here. They've been doing archaeology in this area for about 40 years or more. And in 2022, we went out and actually do have absolute dates from a number of these sites. In the meantime, let's focus on these late intermediate period sites that are contemporaneous with El Purgatorio and that expansion of the Chimu towards Purgatorio. So we have at least three sites in the Sechin complex, or on this large mountain, which I'll try to call the Sechin complex for clarity's sake with consistency. There's Laguna 1, which is the top one. And we're going to focus on the blue and red area. There is Chile, which we have down here, which has a blue, red, and green area. And there's Laguna 2, which almost certainly has a Chimu installation up there in the top right. We're going to look at that a little bit less today. Laguna 2 was actually investigated by Carol Mackey in the 80s, but it wasn't published. So all three of these sites are connected by gentle footpaths that connect the various hollows here, and they remain in use by farming villages and agribusinesses that neighbor and encroach upon the site. Further research is required to determine whether other sites of the complex date to the late intermediate period, which can provide complementary information. But we're really focusing on these large installations because their architecture and surface ceramics can suggest that they are, number one, how they were used, number two, when they were used, and number three, can they give us really good hypotheses for how to proceed with excavation. Let's take a look at the green dot. Here's an oblique view. It's characterized architecturally by a single large and a smaller orthogonal compound, slight left camera. So the site is crossed by two heavily used unimproved farmlands and is used actively as a dumping ground. Nevertheless, the architecture is in surprisingly good condition. In fact, we were up on top of the hill at one point. We came down to find somebody dumping and lighting their garbage on fire inside the structure. And I'm looking at it, what are these guys doing here? What are you guys doing? I'm burning my garbage. So the walls stand at 1 meter or more in height, softened by extensive adobe melt, and the surface is scattered with redware ceramics, much like the one I showed earlier. A surface collection conducted in room 1, which is actually at the right center, included bowl fragments, tinaja fragments, and decorated ceramics with Casma motifs. Marine shells found similar to those found in El Purgatorio are present. So the main building here is we call it Sector B and Building 1. It's primarily it's the primary structure at the site, and it's about 28,000 meters square, 2.87 hectares. It's orthogonal, built primarily of adobe, and the surface architecture suggests it is a late intermediate period installation, meaning a little Purgatorio, just about a couple of kilometers away. The surface ceramics suggest it was most closely associated with the Casma quality because of the preponderance of Casma-sized ceramics and the absence of Chimu ceramics, such as Piaglianzo blackware and other kinds of foods. There's also no tapia present, which is the Chimu style building material. And in contrast, Laguna 2 and Mancha do have, suggesting that we're eliminating this with large Chimu site. So detailed excavations, review of dating, and additional surface inspection will reveal and probably complicate my interpretation of the occupational history of the site. But in any case, what we can see on the surface at least suggests with clarity clues to its function and historicity. So at the core is room 1, which we see here with a green dot in it, which confronts rooms 33, 34, 35, and 36, as well as enclosures that we haven't quite figured out yet. So flanking room 1 is a north-south corridor, which you can see. I wonder if I can put my pointer. But you can see here that green square is essentially a platform. The number 1 room is your plaza. There's a restricted entry that's a purple line, parallel purple line, and there's a parapet that goes vertically north and south on the right. So room 33 is a patio platform backed by a higher surface, which is actually room 41 on here, facing a large open patio, room 1. So this is the core of the platform complex that is diagnostic of cosmetic administrative architecture. But a second elevated section of the site is centered around room 29, highlighted in red. Unfortunately, the eroded surface mitigates our ability to read the architecture of exactitude, but there's sufficient resolution to identify the purpose of this section of the site. So 29 and 30 and possibly 9 are probably receiving rooms, and 28, 27, 26, and 25 are extremely small, yet square storage rooms. 17, 18, and 19, just above it here, are long storage rooms. So the second series of storage is particularly similar to the storage rooms that the Incas used at Ollantaytambo, and suggests that we have two different kinds of storage going on here, administered probably a process through room 4930. We're going to work this out with more detail and observation, but the important part is in close proximity to that ceremonial section in that plaza platform. So in the meantime, the architectural program is visualized by standing architecture, which suggests a ritual administrative installation similar to the compounds of El Purgatorio, Section A, the lead monumental district. And I suspect that excavations of room 33, the platform, will probably reveal niche walls, geometric features, roofing material, and other architectural indices similar to El Purgatorio's compounds. So the most likely scenario is that it's an elite administrative installation of the cosmopolitan that serve the northern branch, the Sechin branch of the valley. The patio nearest the irrigated valley bottom were the most public spaces typically proposed right now. It's actually kind of hard to make them out on here, but see where that car is on the far right? You've actually identified very large patios there, and there's actually a series of algarobos, like 24 or so, that stick out towards the car, suggesting that we had an open patio where that car is on the far right. That would have been between the ceremonial structure, and you can see between 33 and 1, this unusual sort of geometric bell shape. That is the sort of archetypal footprint of a ceremonial plaza platform complex. And then we've got the storage. So you can imagine field, the large open plazas, the ritual area, to processing and collection rooms and private storage up on the hillside. And actually 29 going upwards, this is going uphill, so it'll be harder to get to, high wind, to keep things nice and dry, and regulational. So let's take a look at Chile, and I'm going to contrast their location in just a second. Chile's located like 200 meters from the site we just looked at. Like Laguna 1, it's characterized by a single compound in sector 8, so I'm looking at here, that's surrounded by a low perimeter wall. It has a similar layout, which is about a minute. And here's the part that blows my mind. It encloses almost the exact same amount of space. It's 28,800 square meters. So it's like 800 square meters larger than the other one. These are like cookie cutter, stamped orthogonal structures, 200 meters from each other. We'll go into why and what it is. It's basically made of adobe with walls standing up to 2 meters high. There's a lot of adobe melt. Those are also really nice to excavate. The trowel in there, there's all of them. But there seem to be a higher number of stone walls at Chile, which suggests that maybe actually have a longer occupation. The central subsector, however, includes, wait for it, plaza platform complex. And while the northwest area includes relatively low and where the platform, as well as medium-sized rooms, U-shaped benches, we suspect then again that we have a similar central plaza platform surrounded by use rooms, then with some storage next to it. But where it differs is that it seems to be surrounded by some flanking structures that are associated with it, but are a little bit more diverse than Laguna 1. In any case, that suggests that maybe Chile has an architecture suggestive of a longer and possibly sporadic occupational history over perhaps an even longer period of time. Or maybe a more complex set of functions that could of course be tested through excavation. But here's the part that I'll focus on. So the heart of Chile's compound B1, or the main structure, is our rooms 15, 16, and 13. This again is that sort of truncated bell shape or geometric bell shape, with 16 being a plaza, 15 being a platform, and 13 being the sort of backing of that platform. And I suspect if we did excavations there, we would find niches, possibly offerings, as well as geometric friezes. It looks then to be a plaza platform complex similar to El Purgatorio's 1, as well as Lagoon 1. And under the current adobe melt, it's likely to find similar features of decoration. So as noted by Krohn, Vogel, and others, this orthogonal adobe roof structure, and we've got a bunch of tips to reach there, right on the surface, are hallmarks of cosmopolitan and administrative ritual installations. And here's the thing, we did a ceramic fragment collection in room 16, that plaza, and identifiable rims representing vessels for brewing, serving, and consuming foods, with cosmopolitan motifs. We also found as important. So we found a pantry, a ceramic pantry, there, suggesting again that public events and performances. So we actually are starting to see a tripartite organization of these structures. Like Laguna 1, Chile's architecture suggests that this tripartite is part of it. We have a series of public gathering plazas. Those were the ones that I showed in Laguna 1 with where the truck was parked. We have these red areas, 36, 37, 38, and 17 are large, very open, easily accessible plazas, so large and open that people have moved their houses into them. Then we have at the core this plaza platform complex in green, and surrounding it these blue areas of multiple uses. And here I have some Roman numerals that suggest, just by looking at the site and the way that it develops, what it looks like on the surface, how it hypothesized, it might have developed over time, where I think possibly the top right area would have been perhaps an older settlement, an older structure, maybe even formative, based on some of the stone walls underneath the adobe. That you can still see it right there on the surface. I think it's spread to the left to a low mound area that then was renovated with the construction of, in the third phase, this plaza platform, this sort of corporate Casma style. It may have, and that would have been contemporaneous with the building of these large open areas that are in between the ceremonial area and the administrative areas and the fields beyond. We would have had these open areas that would have been built at the same time as that ceremony, essentially when they were instantiated, this connection between production, collection, and ritualization. Again, we have a whole lot of Algarobo rafters coming out, suggesting a canopied roof area. But again, these are ideas we need to test through the excavation. So, so the temporal and functional relationship between Chile and Laguna is a compelling mystery. Based on the hypothetical temporality of Chile, it would seem that Laguna 1 might be later, perhaps being installed at the same time as that green area in Chile. Direct comparison of radiocarbon assays from close into areas will definitely help with this. But if the contemporaneity of the plaza platforms in Chile and Laguna 1 can be confirmed, I suspect it to be awfully close. Given that the architecture and the ceramics on the surface suggest that the final use was as Casma State administrative ritual installations. It's most likely that what we have here are two different administrative ritual installations that are dealing with two sides of the valley. In other words, why would there be two mirror image structures at this ostensibly? Why would there be two mirror image structures at this point around, I'm thinking 1290 to 1420? Because there's two mirror branches of the Casma Valley, and this is actually the confluence point. And so I think what's going on is that Laguna 1, the one that we see at the top of the screen, you can see the fields right there. Well, another like 500 meters above is the river valley, is the actual valley, the river itself. And I think that, and on the bottom, we actually have the Mojeque branch or the Casma branch or the Casma Southern branch actually touches the hill right off frame here. I think that those are basically the sort of two sides of the valley at the confluence point, at the apogee of the Casma State. So I do want to point out that we have this other site here, Laguna 2, which I have been largely ignoring, precisely because I think this site was developed perhaps, well, certainly by the Casma State for a while before it became replaced by a Chimu structure when the Chimu moved in around 1450. So this, I think, tells us three sites that can tell us quite a lot about the transition from and confrontation between the Casma State and the Chimu in the Casma heartland, and by extension, telling us quite a lot about how the Casma State operated at its heyday. I want to turn in my last couple of minutes here to the other part of this, the upper end of the middle Sechin branch, to La Goyete, the part circled in a large circle there. We have three sites here that are large, they're densely populated with a variety of different kinds of architecture, and they have a lot of Casma period ceramics on them. We have Tucushuanca, and here I want to show you what we have actually absolute dates for. So we have this orthogonal building. It is cluttered with data collection units that we've done in the past year, but it's essentially a small orthogonal structure that features adobe. This would be like a tertiary quaternary site. This would be sort of like in the outskirts of the hinterland, an administrative structure from the cosmopolitan. We also have a population center here, in this hillside area that looks like it's kind of without striations. We were actually able to collect and process the radiocarbon samples from in situ wood architectural posts, and they both come out to about 1300 to 1400 or 1430 AD. This is congruent with the population growth of Purgatorio, so it suggests an investment in population and renovation of structures. And in this case, the renovation of this, which is building one at Tucushuanca, which looks like a small scale ritual administrative structure that is also being unauthorizedly used as an end field. That's what those weird sort of stitched on the top looks like. I apologize for the terrible photo, but around La Goyete, we also have Ayacucho, a fascinating site that has absolute dates that again relate to the heyday of El Purgatorio and Casma State. Unfortunately, this image is obscured by clouds, and I haven't run we have drone photos of it. Or deal with the drone photos. Into that. We have a couple of dates that actually came back from this, from a couple of different studies. One of which was actually this monumental, massive wooden post they found way up on the hill that Ivan Getzi and Monica Suarez in 2019 published around 1350, giving us again a cosmopolitan date. But then we have later dates from other posts and so forth. So this site is probably also a Chimu site. So we're now working out in both relative and absolute terms, the settlement history of these two key points in the Casma Valley. I'll point out the third site that we're looking at here is called Horno Pampa. We'll be going there and taking some more drone photography to get detailed views and a georeferencing of this area. But there is a massive production area that we found there. And again, we have in situ posts that date also to that heyday of the cosmopolitan, suggesting a major population processing area. So here we are, slide 33. So what are some of the interpretations? Well, Cerro Sechin, which has the site of Laguna 2, seems to have been a key point in the administrative landscape of the Casma State that included El Purgatorio in the south branch and sites around La Goyete in the north branch, just looked at. It seems to have two facilities for ritualizing administration, in which open patios allowed massive access, probably for gathering and collecting the materials of many people and families who populated the river valley, and centralized sections featuring plazas and platforms that ritualized the collection and redistribution of goods, or at least associated those activities with ritual activities that would be happening periodically. So look, these conclusions need to be refined based on subsequent excavation. I suspect the basic interpretation will actually hold, precisely because the architectural program is visible on the surface and kind of diagnostic. But both Cerro Sechin and La Goyete give evidence of administrative installations with the Casma State and complementarity to El Purgatorio and Mathis. They both also have evidence for post-Casma occupation. So what was that? What was the socio-political apparatus in a big way that being joint hegemony? Well, it seems like a relatively peaceful and largely pragmatic shift from one, local rule under the Casma State that ritualized the redistribution of goods, to two, a brief for bureaucratic control of production and processing of goods under the Casma State. So based on Purgatorio staff growth at around 13 to 1400, it appears Casma elites may have actually attempted to emulate the Chimu as the Chimu came down the coast, or at least solve some of the same problems that the Chimu were solving as they came down the coast by similar means locally. It's likely the expansion of the Chimu into the frontier territory of the Casma State, like at Cerro Sechin, catalyzed administrative changes among the Casma, the consolidation of population of workforce, Purgatorio, and also La Goyete and possibly Sechin. But ultimately, the Chimu arrive in many Casmeños end up at Mancha, earlier in a dual Casma-Chimu arrangement. So my last slide here, these are solid conclusions from the data we have so far, but additional architectural and artifactual information about the functions of buildings, the dates will help with finding interpretation and probably complicating this, and give us better information about the Casma State and its contribution to Chimu. Given the current interpretation, that would be a transition from ritualized reproduction, ritualized production to bureaucratic storage and processing. John Potter suggested for the Chimu. And with that, I say thank you, gracias, and goodbye, which would be interesting. Thank you very much for your patience and attention. We have a little bit of time, I think, and I would be very pleased for your questions. And I have some more images and stuff that we can look at that helps analyze.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank
you.
I'm curious if you have that matter where you're showing some of the sites based north and south,
yeah.
and you were saying that you think that these are collection points for redistribution for the north and south. I'm just curious, do you have any theories why it got further west? Yeah.
That's a great question. So, so I can bring this up. So we do have another site here. It's called, I think it's called Cerro Sechin. And for whatever reason, and I wondered that myself, because we have here at the confluence, here's the two rivers, here's Purgatorio, which we know had this confluence into this sort of capital, major population, ritual administrative center in the late intermediate period, 700 to, but probably about around 1100 to 1400, it really started picking up, and a population explosion of 1350, right? So you've got these smaller sites up here. These are our two river branches. We're seeing this particular site, Cerro Sechin, the complex here, really being where we have a whole lot of architecture across a couple of different periods. But the confluence happens a slightly further down, like right here. And the question is, why isn't it happening further west here at Cerro Sechin? And I really don't know. However, we might look at this in a sort of social landscape or landscape of memory perspective. So I mentioned, I briefly passed over what is the most well-known part of Cerro Sechin, the namesake temple, right, which is actually where everybody else, Cerro Sechin. That was part of a larger complex of formative period sites, 3000 to 1600 BC. And it might be that this becomes in a sort of central location that has a long-standing, sort of like as a central point in long-standing social memory. And so it keeps getting reused as opposed to Cerro Sechin. The reason that the question then becomes, why is Cerro Sechin getting used in the first place? Why do they build this wild temple here? It's a wild sort of reason. You've got like bodies and have like guts coming out, like you tell it's like that's the duodenum, like stomach, very well rendered from 1600 BC. So why do they choose this site? Well, can I set that particular question and just say that it was there, and this site then may have become increasingly or sort of perpetually the central point. And point of gravity, you see early formative and late formative at least, and then we see these late intermediate period sites. So it gets used at least in those three periods where we have a lot of data evidence suggesting it's being used. I'll also point out that there are a lot of cemeteries around this site, suggesting that people really had a deep connection to it, including on top of that oldest, most well-rendered monumental art, that you see at the old temple here, that becomes reused as a cemetery. So all of these lines of evidence suggest that once selected for whatever reason, this continues to be really important. So my argument then, this is actually what I'm trying to figure out, how to parse out which information in what ways, frankly, the publication already. But I think from a perspective of landscape of memory, this is implanted and then you're in this spot. I should also say, I cannot say that this didn't come between these two sites. That's also a possibility. So the Casma branch or the Heke branch comes here and basically touches Cerro Sechin. The Sechin branch comes this way and goes that, but it's not impossible that it once came down through here. So it actually could have been, but I had. What's that? Which one? Well, I mean, I would say that so Cerro Sechin at 1600 BC and 3000 BC site was, yeah, it was definitely like it's a Waka. And then we've actually got Sechin Alto and a couple of other large sites of resources suggest we're actually like a sort of power center and more informative. And so you basically have this area becoming the center, and Cerro Sechin, I don't know, I just don't know why. And of course it has before building. There's also like really neat dogs that live over there. Those dogs, they were not. Great question. I really appreciate it. Thanks. Other questions? Yeah. So that is a great question. At individual sites that within the area, whether they were you have a stable population that's moving around, that I am not, we don't know. And so I can definitely tell you that El Purgatorio had a massive influx of population. And frankly, the dates that we do have at these sites, Tucushuanca and Pampa, that had extensive habitational terraces, those coincide with the growth at El Purgatorio. So it looks like we do, and we have absolute dates for those. We got those exported and had them assayed. We have really nice provenance for those objects. They were basically in situ posts that would have been old roofs, and a couple of them from a couple of sites. That does suggest a population growth. The question is whether it's a consolidation of a dispersed population or an actual growth from elsewhere. We don't know. David Wilson did sort of gestures at this in his his large book on the Santa Valley, a little bit further up in the late 80s. We came back in the 90s and published a very small, did a similar study, but published an extremely small version of it, which we've actually worked with. I've actually laid over his survey in the valley that suggests that our population growth, his dates and his way of identifying sites aren't really useful. Or they're just not accurate. Even now, they tell us about a continuous scatter. We know he saw stuff continuously. What it meant, what it dated to, is not super useful for doing something. But you're pointing to an open mystery, whether it's a population growth or consolidation. Definitely, some of these sites individually had population growth, but whether or not I'm trying to work through the material, and so we're this kind of like intermediate stage, and I don't know that we're going to have a great answer to that. Thank you. Yeah. Other questions? These are great questions. Jonah, yes.
I was going to ask if, looking at the redistribution structure,
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see any evidence that say the Casma State infrastructure was overtaken and used by Chimu or
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think this is probably where there'll be some debate among couple of my colleagues. So basically, at this stage, given what I can see, and given the work that Carol Mackey did in the early '80s at Laguna 2 on the far right, and Monchan, what I think happens is I think these are Casma State sites that are abandoned when the Chimu show up. I think there was also Casma installations over here, so we actually have to go and do. We'll probably have to do some drilling about it here and there, and then which is really the long term. And I should point out that I'm proposing this will be a long-term project that is honestly 10 years long. We'd like to recruit actually students. Like, these would be great projects for students to focus on parts under the coordination of a larger project. But I think we'll find that these and these are Casma, like sort of pre-1300 and 1400, and then this area gets reused by the Chimu. And my thought is, like, I actually think it's kind of, I hate to say it, but I actually think that you're going to find in the right now that it's going to be boring. I think there's a prosaicness about all of this, where you basically have the Chimu Wes's conquerors and meals of the party that has an administrative apparatus that shows up and is actually really good at it. And so they're like, no, we don't need these two. Like, we'll just build our other one up there. And they basically take over this area. And like, why have people coming from these two parts of the valley? Why not just use this one, which actually is much more easy? We'll have one set of people organizing this. That's something you can see on the front that looks like sort of like light colored. I think those are the tapiales. And I think that's the Chimu imposition. I think they probably just stopped using these, or these got used for other less efficient people.
You said in that case that you arrival of the Chimu disrupted
like IU like Moides or something like that. Yeah.
Maybe actually there's
Yeah. Yeah, or actually it could be in this spectrum. I don't know if I'm just actually but like on the one hand, it could be that we're seeing kind of prediction where like a bunch of people living in the valley are used to like interchanging, sort of paying taxes and getting things for it to the local leaders, and it's like, no, I'll meet with your boss and it's your boss to move. But as part of that, also they're doing the other potentiality could be both of those. And this is like sort of, this doesn't happen all at once, right? And so it could be like you see a sort of shifting in social relationships over time, and maybe not over a couple of generations under the Chimu. That's totally possible. Really nice stuff. Whether we can work that out is a good question. I mean, I do see Purgatorio a lot of evidence for dualism, which I'll get a big trouble with. The data is like showing you, and you're not going in. Like, oh, it's a dual organization, and that's what I'm going to find. And you're like, no, I'm not going to play that. I'm not going to do no. And the next thing you know, you're like, well, actually, I just see like things about central points all at various scales, and like maybe the argument is like that's what I'm seeing here. 2 river branches, and the two are like consolidated. We're gonna focus in a few staples, and we're gonna do this stuff. And they're like, great, commoners are well, whatever. Like that's just one place I got to go now, but what comes with that? Yeah, good questions. Yeah.
Because I'm sure there's like no real date for like the IU, right? So I'm just wondering like what sort of thing, and then maybe like maybe you have people who are from empire like no your ideas now.
Yeah.
You're gonna do it, okay. So I haven't never thought of that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And also as another kind of ambiguity here, which is that we don't usually think of the code as being IU. So I started beginning with like Cajamarca, which is sort of highland area. We talk about San Rio, some sort of coastal way of life, but it actually has a similar sort of familial or super familial based approach. So I really awesome. It's very broad strokes. However, as sort of Jonah asked, the duality does emerge a whole bunch there is evidence that there are connections on land, especially in the Casma Valley, the land is so close. Like you could see rain irrigated fields from some of these sites, which is telling you just how close they are. Like the shortest route to us, only like 100 kilometers to the side of the Andes from the coast. So the question is, is there a sort of, could it be that items being posed? So I guess the way I think about that is as the Casma State geos, it may be politicizing and formalizing elements of pre-existing, sort of social, or social relation. Actually, can also so you see the ceramics all over the place. And this is a little bit of what we see going on with like Noche de Naso, North, is that you have like these terms that are going around with, oh, this stuff that doesn't belong in museums. It's like what do they call them? Original substrate, like the submaterial, just like utilitarian stuff that doesn't mean anything. Except it becomes the stuff that can have to get politicized as if it's identifiable, people are like, well, this is just how we do it around here. It's totally easy to politicize that. But even the politicization of the regions, the Boulevard area. Like they're everywhere, and yet then they become sort of like, capitalism as a company. And they're like, we can make our own Soviet. So we believe us, not great. The idea is that like things that appear to be sort of meaningless are actually ubiquitous, but legible and like really identifiable. Like identifiable. Those are actually really good things to create sort of ethno-political sort of connections. And so to get back to your question, that may be what's going on across the several hundred years about Purgatorio Casma State that then gets perhaps disrupted in consolidation. This is really nice stuff that's good this way. We have these two sort of mirrored sites that maybe get rid of this single site for doing too. That's nice. Shifting kind of sociopolitical organization. I like it. That's a question. That's very interesting. Any other questions? Well, maybe going on a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think they're just thank yous from the audience in the internet. I actually have a quick question, for more naive and for the non-specialist, but were these sites that you were studying at the peak at the time of the encounter? And what happened at the encounter? Likely, this idea of redistribution was something alien.
So there's a lot of writing. I think it happened the way the Spanish showed up and interfaced with indigenous social groups is discontinuous across the Andes. And so, like we know, for example, there's lots of competing arguments about what happened with Incas. And the way that I generally think about it. When the Spanish showed up, you've got these sort of like venture capitalist like ruffians that show up in Solaris who are like looking for US with like title and they're willing to fight for it literally, who basically come in like strong and fighting people and capturing and killing people, and then the crown is like two things, guys. Number one, like it's terrible to like destroy a system that's working. You want to skim off it. And number two, very quickly, as I understand it, the Spanish crown was like, that was a monarchy and it's really bad form for one monarchy to topple and kill another monarch, because that's against the whole idea of monarchism. There's a whole series of debates about this, but these are the sort of the ambiguities or the ambivalences that happen within. You have a whole mess of these things. And so there is then this among the Inca Empire, there's this a whole thing about getting the puppet Incas and the Spanish who now have the sort of the power de facto once they've sort of toppled all this stuff, then trying to find the rightful person to the throne and put them on the throne again to manage his people, so to speak. And then in Spanish very quickly figure out that actually the group that they helped topple itself fractured into various factions. So it's discontinuous in that respect. And number two, what's going on the coast? This is sort of, in my knowledge, a pretty big lacuna. We do know that at 1617, coming into the Casma State, which grants rights over labor in this area. This is a document that I've known about for 15 years now and haven't really been able to go through because I also believe it's very particular strict. But one of the things that's unusual is that this is a very late period to be sort of ready and but it's known 1617 from the end of the Casma is archived in Sevilla So we're not really sure, but if I then look at evidence, it might suggest that whatever is going on from the Chimu period to the Inca, being between them, Inca and the Spanish is like 50 years. We may actually be seeing some of those pre-existing forms really endure in this area. And also just personally think that this Casma has its own world somehow. And I'm not really sure why it is. I sort of be very clear in my own personal experiences in a place where literally, like during the political upheavals of the last year, my colleagues are like, I don't know, I see this stuff on the news, but here it's it's like totally, it's another world. And I want to be very clear that is a historian's bias and fallacy to project that onto the past. But the evidence suggests some unique things going on in this area. One that I didn't point out here to highlight that is that you have the Moche in the earlier period coming down to the next valley. There's almost no Moche style. You have the Lari in the Horizon period coming all the stuff and then stopping in the next valley to the south. Why are we not seeing those things in Casma? And one possibility is either that it empties out in those periods, people move to like neighboring valleys, or there's a very pragmatic, prosaic, not particularly materially invested thing going on in the Casma Valley that sort of endures and actually it's really hard for people to come into other routes, the Wari, the Moche, even the Chimu. They don't conquer this, it doesn't become Chimu territory. It becomes like a Casma Chimu sort of dual world. Like they talk their way in rather than fall their way. Anyway, cool questions. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the patience and generosity on listening. And I would be really glad to follow up with anybody in person, virtually later on, and let's eventually we'll go back in the info.
Thank you very much, David. Great.